People can start to sit down a little bit. I know. Talk to the rest of them. All right, everyone. So I think this is the last panel of the day. So we're going to cover some really exciting discussions, and we'll make sure we cover any questions at the end here. So we have about 45 minutes. What I like to do is leave about 10, 15 minutes at the end for Q&A. And then, we'll obviously dive into it shortly. And before we do that, I always like to take a survey of the audience in terms of backgrounds and what you're focused on. So who here is with startups or entrepreneurs, sort of the earlier stage of the world? All right. Who here is with like larger companies, business development, what we call board of street. All right, we got a few strategics. How about in the financial world? Those P guys looking for the next big thing, banks like myself. All right, great. We got a few more people filtering in here too. So I'm Peg Jackson. I'm with Stifel. I help with Stifel's tech practice, focusing on M&A, fundraising, IPO work for the MarTech world. And certainly within that is the big ad tech area. And we're going to introduce the rest of our panelists shortly. I usually like to kick off with some stats, which, I think given how this market's been up and down in 22, it's always good to kind of get a baseline before we start some of these questions. So first off, US TV ad spend, just thinking more about linear, was around 70 billion. So obviously it's still a huge market. It's have some decline, but it's not big decline year over year. So there's still a lot of budget there, which for Amy and the rest of the group will talk about. And also there's this interesting thing where it's not just going away. There's a big shift to digital. So, when you think of a world of unified TV down the road with video, you have to keep that in context to, what these market sizes mean. Another one is SBOT. Video streaming, 150 million users, about 34 billion in spend. So it's definitely a hot area we're going to talk about. The monetization of it, it's growing about 10% year over year. And then you had the big announcement in Q4. Netflix starts to do advertising. So you're seeing these ad tier subscription structures that we're going to dive into. Disney Plus, really took off on the streaming side. And you're seeing the average revenue per user on streaming going, around the 250 per user level. So it's definitely starting to become, that market people are thinking. So with that, I'll hand it off to Amy and you guys can do an introduction.
Great. Thank you, Peg. Hi, everyone. I'm Amy Ginsberg. I'm the Chief Investment Officer at Havas, based in New York. And I oversee all of the marketing dollars spent across linear, digital, performance, e-commerce, all of the things. So if our clients spend money, it's usually through my team.
Good day. I'm Saul Berman. I come here every year and try to give some sense to what's being shown and what's real and what's Memorex. I work for IBM and I have led our strategy practice there, wrote a book a few years ago called Not for Free. So today we're going to talk about, I think, if content is free or somebody's going to be able to make money out of it. Today I help lead our Salesforce partnership at IBM as well.
Hi, everyone. I'm Robert Schildhaus. I'm the general manager of BritBox, which is a joint venture between BBC and ITV. My background has been in streaming really since the beginning. I was one of the first employees at Hulu and was at CBS for years on the digital distribution side. And now I'm spreading British content around America.
We need more of it.
Hi, Steve Silvestri. I'm the Senior Vice President at Warner Brothers Discovery. My purview and focus is the monetization of audiences across our portfolio of networks, and that's across linear as well as digital.
And I'm Dan Callahan from Fox, also Senior Vice President of Sales Strategy and Innovation, so really focused on advanced audience activation, working across the portfolio in a cross-screen manner, and unlocking different automation programmatic technologies to help our clients better monetize our inventory.
Great, thanks. So the title of the panel here is Monetizing TV Streaming, the different strategies. Obviously, as I just mentioned, on some of these streaming services, you've seen advertising start to, be a part of the business model. So that's a big shift for when the streaming services first came out, is really focused on subscription revenue. Maybe Amy and a few of you can kick off with, how big is that perceived in the market? Certainly from your side, is this a whole new type of inventory opportunity that you guys get excited by? Maybe a little insight there.
Sure. I think everyone on my side of the house is probably like, thank goodness it's finally happened. And we were waiting for it for so many years. And it's funny because I was at a panel a couple of years ago, and somebody from Netflix was on the panel and said, we will never air advertising. And I was like, oh, that's unfortunate. But things changed, and it did. And so now they are taking advertising. It was very quick turnaround. And if we're all being honest, I don't think it's started off as amazingly as anyone would like, but we do have a lot of hope for it. I know at least on my side that I do. And I think that hopefully moving forward, there'll be more subscribers. But I think I also look at it from a different tact, and I'm looking at it from the point of, from my side, yeah, of course I want to be able to buy whatever I want to buy. I want to buy impressions all the time. But I think from the consumer's point of view, is this going to be a good experience for them? And so I'm trying to think about it that way from my perspective. I mean, if you're not going to pay for the ad tier, then you don't have to watch the ads. Right. But I think that switching over is where the issue is. So I think that's what needs to be worked on.
And do your brands think of doing the advertising in a different way? Like, is it more branding than just the 30-second commercial? Are they thinking about sort of, because it's streaming, do you have to do the content maybe a little differently or something like that?
Well, I think that's what we were doing before they were allowing advertising. So trying to get product within programs and doing it that way so that, our brands could have a voice there without actually having a voice. I think yes is the answer to that, because I think that depending on what you're doing and what you're trying to do, obviously you have to have shorter ads there. And so, yes, there are different ways to do that, but I think it also depends on what you're airing and what you're trying to do and how you're trying to do it.
So,
can we ask the audience a question? Is anybody out here would like to have more ads in their streaming?
well, would you pay less if you could pay less for it? Would you take the ads? No? Okay. Well, now we know where the viewership is.
What I found interesting, to Amy's point about streaming never really had ads. Hulu started as an ad-supported streaming service. Even when it went to SVOD, it was an ad-supported subscription video on demand service. I'm not sure what the letters are for that, but SVOD, something like that. But what I'm curious about right now is, are users going to downshift into the ad-supported tier as opposed to a full churn out? So I think that might be an opportunity to watch as the market continues to evolve. That instead of maybe turning off Netflix because The Crown isn't on anymore, you might downshift into the ad tier and watch less of it. Now, for Amy, I'm not sure if that's helpful because maybe that means they're watching less ads, but I'm just going to be watching that part of the sector as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I would say that in this world where no one really has the crystal ball of this new era and this revolution of streaming television, I think Netflix's move into advertising is I think it's huge, but it also speaks to the economics. I think we're recognizing the economics in this new era is an ad-supported one, where the highest average revenue per user is yielded from that economic model the way it was and supported for premium content previous to the streaming era. So I think it's a huge milestone.
And from our perspective at Fox, I mean, we were the lone network that never ventured into the SVOD space. So I think on the surface, I found it very validating to a degree, right? That advertising matters. Interruptive advertising is back in the form of 15s and 30s and commercial pods, and not these unique integrations that we had to chase for years and try to keep up with the competitors in that space. And I think it validates the advertising marketplace, right? It's nice to talk about advertising on Netflix. I think that the CTV space as a whole is going to see an influx of new spend and new advertisers that come in, and it kind of is a notch of credibility. When they were anti-advertising, they got to be this premium niche streaming service that was kind of above the fray, and now they get to compete with us, which is terrifying to a degree as well, right? Because you have more competition in that tier. But I find it validating and encouraging for CTV and streaming as a whole.
But we got to worry about the consumer. I hate to keep coming back to that. Our research over many years said some consumers will watch the ads. I don't know who they are. Other consumers will want to pay for a subscription, and others want to pay a la carte. And if you really want to optimize your opportunity, you've got to offer all three. The advertising part has some bid in there. And the question is really, how do you bring your analytics to play, and how do you optimize what everybody has and reduce the horrible churn that you have right now? You can't continue to grow a business with 50% a year churn, which is what we have now.
Yeah, I don't think there's a wholesale change. I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a balance of both. In an ad model in streaming, I think there is a definite delicate balance of how you deliver that to the end consumer. And I think with data and technology now playing a huge role in everything that we're doing in the advertising business, we have all the tools and the analytics necessary to indeed get that right.
Yeah.
Yeah, because otherwise the consumer is going to try and skip the ads. And there are technologies out there or new technologies that are coming that'll let them do that. So find the model you can monetize that works for them. One size doesn't fit all. Nobody that I know wants to watch 3-4 minutes of advertising all the time. Maybe if you make it reasonable, people will accept it.
There's also, I think, a global aspect of, we tend sometimes to be very U.S. centric, ability to spend more money. And a lot of these businesses like Netflix are global, subscriber bases. And, are you seeing some in the streaming world, and maybe, Robert, something for you in terms of international, interesting trends there in terms of streaming acceptance or, content? Obviously content now is so much more global. I know you have something about the Asia content we'll talk about.
Should we just get into that?
Yeah.
So, no, I saw an article last month that Netflix reported that over 60% of their global audience was regularly watching Korean programming, which I just thought was fascinating. I have been very involved in the Korean content marketplace. I often say I was buying Korean content in the US 10 years before Squid Game. But Squid Game by the way, that is not the only show that has been successful on Netflix from Korea, but that is such a uniquely Korean television show, not the least of which is the language itself. And so if you think about other content producing centers around the world, as Americans, and I don't know how many of the people in the room are American? Some. How many not from America? So in America, for those of you not from America, we did not grow up watching television from anywhere outside of the Hollywood ecosystem. We had adaptations of formats, but never was there even so much as a British accent on American television growing up. Films, a slightly different story, but never on television. And what streaming was able to do is basically remove that shelf space constraint that the broadcast networks have historically had. And now globally, you have these amazing content producing centers all over the world, whether it's Korea or Japan or the Nordics or Israel or Latin America or the UK, which is where I obviously operate. And that content is now available to everyone around the world. And so what we're finding is there's this incredible content production quality, as well as an acceptance and a desire and really a thirst for this different stories being told that are consumed on a global basis right now. And I think that's particularly exciting. I see it in my business as we're obviously solely in the British content space, which is obviously quite accessible to an American audience because we speak the same language. But you can, if you want to watch a Nordic crime noir in the U.S. or anywhere around the world, you can do that now, and that's incredibly exciting. That just opens up a huge amount of content that doesn't just have to be sourced from one specific location. And in our case, that's in the United States, that's just historically Los Angeles.
That's very helpful. Thanks. And we'll get a little bit more into the need for blockbuster content in a bit. But, one area, I think is people, got through 22, and there are a lot of questions now, especially within the advertising world, of what about 23? Is it up, down, sideways? And there's a lot of different viewpoints out there. Maybe Amy, start off and just talk about at least how, you guys are seeing the world going into 23.
Sure. I mean, as someone who purchases things, I'm always going to tell you that there's going to be less money in the market the next year. But this year, I really mean it. But I do think all the indicators are there. And what we're seeing, even at the end of last year, was a spending slowdown. And I think linear's been slowing down for a while. So that's not new to anyone. And I don't think anyone would be surprised by that. But what I think that was surprising last year was digital has seen such explosive growth over the last, I don't know, 10, 15 years that double digits, triple digits. It was insane. And we saw that slow last year. Now, I'm not going to say, and you guys would know better than I would, that it wasn't growth. There wasn't growth at all, because there certainly was, but it wasn't to the levels that it was before. And I think with the recession in Europe right now and all of that news, obviously it's different here at this point, but I think that's scaring people. So I know that my clients especially are, taking a longer time to decide what they're going to spend and where they're going to spend it. So I think we're going to be buying closer to when we're airing versus what we used to be doing. But I do think that spending will be down. That was a very long-winded way of saying that. Spending will be down over the next year. You guys will disagree.
Hard to disagree. I mean, I'd like to be the optimist. I think the last couple of years have certainly been uncertain, and spending has been flat to up. I think that streaming and premium video will win out. I think that yes, digital and other pockets that have exploded, social, right, things that are under as bright of a light and under scrutiny from accountability and brand safety and where am I spending my money. My hope is that yes, budgets are flat or they're down, but still premium content companies went out, premium streaming services went out, working directly with companies like Warner Brothers and Fox versus going through a third party or an aggregator. I think people are going to get smarter, right? We pay a lot of tech taxes. There's a lot of intermediary fees right now that will probably be reevaluated, right? So I do think it's going to be a reset year. I'm hopeful that we fare better than maybe some of the financial experts out there are suggesting, but I don't think the companies on stage are the ones that are going to be hit the hardest when you think about where pockets exploded over the last couple of years.
Yeah, from a premium video perspective, I think I like our hand. I think in many ways, the Foxes of the world, the Warner Brothers Discoveries of the world have just arrived. I think in terms of the streaming game, in terms of the technology and tools from an advanced advertising perspective. I'm not going to try and sell up here, but we're launching linear addressable products across our portfolio of networks. We're bringing new tools that are much more digital-like with accountability and those things that matter in times like this, where you can really prove the effectiveness of an advertising campaign. And those things do matter. Clients are looking for those effective solutions. They're looking for ROI, and if we can deliver those things, they will come. So.
Well, that's why we say content is still king, and we've been saying that for a while, but data is queen. And in a tight economy, data becomes even more important to get the right ad, get the right productivity, to get the right insights. So we think increasingly the platforms you have around the content to manage your inventory, to manage your consumer relationships are going to be more important. And we see people like Salesforce putting together those kinds of platforms that's been used more in B2B, but increasingly coming into the B2C space to enable you to bring that data together and really manage the churn problem, manage the customer experience problem, manage the loyalty problem, give them the options of which way they want to buy. And you're going to have the intelligence in that from your different data sources to do that.
Yeah. And, I think just from what I've seen from the ad tech research analysts out there, there's been, quotes of, I think some digital ad spend was around, traditionally 25% year over year. They're still predicting growth, but maybe more in the 5 to 10%. I think that's where you're going, Amy, which is, it's not a dramatic downturn, but it's also, a lot more competitive.
And you're going to have to work a lot harder to get it.
Yeah, a lot more competitive. Yes. So, Steve, I think you hit on it a little bit, and I want you guys to jump into a little bit more on this. The trends you're seeing on the shift from linear to digital, right? There's organizations like yours that, you're playing both worlds now. So it's not necessarily you're losing at linear. There's a transition going on. Also, your ability to now, do better attribution, as we talked about in the linear side. So maybe, just give some insights you're seeing in that world as, the view from linear to digital and the rest of you can chime in.
Yeah, I mean, from our perspective, obviously it's accelerated, right? We've seen our digital advertising platform grow significantly over the last couple of years, primarily due to the fact that we're actually standing up our own identity spine, and we're able to see our audiences. We're able to offer those audiences in a way that's meaningful and addressable. And that's only grown, obviously, with not just the merger, but with our direct-to-consumer offering, Discovery Plus, previously to the merger, and now with HBO Max. All of those assets coming together in the identity spine that we're building, it's only going to increase. And historically, when we're seeing connected TVs, and when we were able to start to identify connected TVs as part of our audience viewership on the digital side of the house, it really accelerated. So it's only going to continue to accelerate.
Yeah, and Amy likes getting that more direct, audience info, and to Saul's point on the data, you can do that when you're going direct. That before it was a lot harder in linear.
But my one thing that I just is bothering me, and I have to say it to you, but
Not here.
Come on, let's go at it.
no, but and listen, I agree with what you're saying, but I also think that part of the reason that things are moving from linear into digital is because we're being asked on our side to do that. So it's not naturally going there. It's going there because you're making us do that. And I'm not saying you're making us do it because it's a great product, but that is accelerating to me some of the growth that you're seeing.
Sure. I think when we go to market, we want to absolutely complement every asset that we have should complement and be anchored in our core. And that could be mass reach. It depends on the marketer's objectives. But yeah, by all means, like, we should be able to give you the biggest amount of reach dependent on your goals and objectives for your particular roster of clients, and deliver that audience in our owned and operated assets, however they're distributed and whatever endpoints they're received by the consumer. So,
And then
Thanks.
there you go.
Did we just make peace? I'm not sure.
Yeah, you and I picked the right seats, huh?
We'll talk after.
I told you to let me sit in the middle.
So if any were here last year for a similar panel like this, we got with Saul into the discussion of that, getting into that one-to-one viewer relationship. And maybe Dan, when you talk about advanced, TVs, we get into a little bit more of the product or what you're seeing there that you guys, at least from the Fox level, have the ability to, go more into that direct viewer aspect.
Yeah, I think that there's two pieces to it, right? We still have a broadcast network, broad in nature. We still have a great live sports portfolio with the NFL, the Super Bowl this year, right? And I think that those big, broad, impactful moments are still going to be meant for that. The way that I think about our digital consumption and Tubi and Fox on Hulu, and where we can really drill down at the addressable level, it is a complement to what we're doing in broadcast. And I think that, my thought for where we're headed in cross screen is that the left hand and the right hand now have a better idea of what each are doing and how those dollars can complement each other, because you still have to brand, you still have to market, and then figure out who your customers are, what your personas are, and reach them and sequentially message them. So I still look at it as a linear mass reach awareness vehicle, a digital streaming addressable. I hate to call it a compliment because it's bigger than a compliment now. It was probably a compliment a couple of years ago. It is meaningful, and you have to be there. But I think that there still is a time and a place for the linear side of the house and the technology and the measurement that's available there, and now what digital can unlock and deliver, at the IP level and at a one-to-one delivery basis.
Does anybody watch linear television anymore?
Right? Yeah.
For anything
It's
other
recorded.
than anything other than live events?
It's yeah.
I don't believe it.
Well, somebody's watching it.
I'm doing a lot of shifting on, HDMI 2, 3, 4. So Saul, one thing I think, we're talking about sort of the here now, but it's always fun to look a little bit into the future, and there's, future trends of formats and streaming. We maybe talk a little bit about podcasting, but, streaming can mean many things. And what we're seeing is that, if anything, it's getting more verticalized in a lot of ways. If you look at Apple TV, you see a lot of different streaming services that aren't just video anymore, right? So maybe Saul, start pick that off, and anyone else can jump in.
Well, we could still go in a lot of directions here, but clearly there's a lot of shift, a lot of experimentation. We talked a little bit as a group about windowing. So what role does the traditional distribution channel play? What role does the digital channel play? When do we use each of those? And there's going to be a lot of experimentation. And who owns that? Well, it can't be as many people as own it now. There'll always be a place for content creators, but there can't be that many distributors, if you will, to the end consumer. The end consumer is frustrated. The end consumer is lost as we speak now. The end consumer can't push all the buttons, as you were just saying, on the device. They don't know which device to pick for which channel that they're trying to receive. They're paying two people for the same thing in some cases because their cable company is selling it to them if they still have that. Their set-top box, their television set is selling it to them, so they're buying it over the top in a different kind of package. So, to me, there needs to be some kind of rationalization. We got away from bundling. We hated it, but now we're going to have rebundling of one form or another. And there's place for people like Disney with a brand name and maybe Netflix that then spends enough developing the content to be able to keep their brand out there and to be able to keep their own distribution. But other people are going to struggle if they don't go through an aggregator. And somehow, like in most businesses, you end up dealing with 2, 3, or 4 providers. The end consumer is not going to end up dealing with 10 different consumers or 10 different groups that provide content to them. So there has to be some shakeout. It can take place in different forms, but it's a natural event for that to happen at this point.
Consolidation.
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I think especially for more of the mainstream content players out there, I think what's unique, like where I play in the niche or specialty space, where you see there are a few very successful brands that play in that area where you can develop a real deep relationship with the consumer. I mean, you mentioned before, Saul, the churn epidemic in streaming services. On my service, we have a single-digit churn percentage. It is incredibly low relative to the marketplace because we serve a very specific need to millions of people in North America and around the world who love our type of programming. And you see that in a few other very specific verticals that are out there where, yes, you can develop a relationship with consumers and you can live and people will seek you out despite all the noise in the marketplace. So I think the challenge from my perspective is going to be some of the mainstream streamers who don't have an ecosystem to support and have to think about streaming as a P&L. And look at Netflix at over 200 million subscribers is still a difficult business to look at on fundamentals alone. If you look at Amazon, where the ROI of streaming supports a broader ecosystem play, that makes a ton of sense. How much sense does that make for a mainstream traditional media company who has to report to Wall Street every 90 days on their investment in content and how that's with the output of that in terms of subscribers? That's a very difficult thing to do.
So Warner Discovery is the best example of the brand that has that opportunity and the challenge of that at this point.
We certainly do. I think again, we're super excited. I do think that, for us as an owned and operator of premium content and these relationships that we've established from a super fan perspective and all of the assets we carry from just a traditional programming perspective, we want to get that in front of as many consumers as possible. And consumers are deciding how they're receiving content, to your point. So we're really going to play the agnostic game, right? We are going to try and get that to the end consumer as seamlessly as we can through a lot of efforts and new affiliate deals. And this is a whole new world of streaming, and the economics are changing, and we have to be nimble enough to sort through all that. And that's what we're doing. I think that's where a lot of hands are at.
That's a lot better place than we were a few years ago as an industry. It's a lot better place that everybody's more open to this. 5 years ago, 10 years ago, I started to write 15 years ago about the end of television as we know it and what was going to happen to cable falling off a cliff. And for 10 years, the industry wanted to say, not in my lifetime, let the next person worry about it.
But is that, Steve, to that point, is it driven a little bit by, the cost of program? It's a bit of a hit business in a lot of cases. You got to spend a lot of money on the big programs that come to play. And now is it like we have to figure out how to monetize this? It's a little bit of the business model, I think, right? Maybe talk a little bit about what you guys are seeing on that programming side, to be competitive.
I think there's a desire. I mean, I was looking at it before we came out here, right? I mean, there's some version of a Fox app across 23 different services or platforms, which is a lot. And that's fragmented. It's hard for the viewer. Our lives are hard from an ad serving and tracking those impressions standpoint. I hope it consolidates some. I hope it whittles down, and maybe it's, the TV manufacturers went out and a handful of other providers, and then you're on 5 or 6, maybe the way we are in the MVPD space today. But, there's this very, I guess, sharp edge of, do we need to be on that service or platform or don't we? How big is their footprint? Is it sizable enough that we're going to get enough consumption there? At the same time, the economics are changing. Some people want Fox Sports. They want to have the World Cup. They want to be able to say they have the Super Bowl on their platform. So there's this very interesting jockeying game that's still going on as the platforms try to arm themselves with the right content to attract that user base. We have to be very wary of how big is that footprint today, and is it going to be sizable enough to make a meaningful impact to our ad revenue and our ad business. And my fear is at 23, there's probably going to be 35 before it starts to collapse again. I think we're going to see more players in this space, more competitors, the Walmart news, that more people want to compete in this and try to make some money in it before people start to drop off.
And Amy, from are your brands saying, hey, I just want the best, most popular content, or is there more of a play for them to be more experimental and go into, sort of less the blockbuster angle, or anything you're seeing there in terms of interest on that?
Yeah, and I think that really does depend on the brand, and
Yeah.
some brands don't want to take any risks at all, and other brands I want to take all of the risks. So I think that really is brand dependent and what they want to do. I do think that I don't think you have to make expensive content for it to be good content. And I think people gravitate and find good content wherever it is on whatever platform it is.
Yeah.
So I think that, how do you know if you're making something cheap that it's going to be good? You don't. But I just don't think that it always has to be this big blockbuster, spend and promotion, because people are finding things. We were talking about it earlier before when we were talking about, all the Korean programming that people are finding. It's just more options for people to have, which is good, to get people to all these platforms. So I like that, because that brings people to the platforms and they, looking for new things. That's, the part right now that is not that easy, because I know that that's my frustration when I'm wandering around looking for a show to watch.
Yeah. So Saul, maybe for you, do you feel like with also on the production cost side a little bit too, with, all this, they're calling generative AI stuff that can sort of replicate much more easier, less human interaction production. Does that start to come in the equation on some of these models too?
Amazingly, I was going to say yes. Up to now, I've been pretty skeptical about that on the creative side, and I've tested some of that in the past, including our own Watson product, and was not convinced we were ready for that. But some of the things that are out there now, like this Chat CPT and some of the others on AI, they're right. You ask them a question, they'll write you a letter. They'll write you creative copy. They'll write you part of a script. And it's not bad from what I can see.
Goes back to the quality a little bit, what Amy was saying.
Well, I mean,
Bring it on.
before we go into quality, the television we listen to streaming, the podcasts we listen to streaming in many cases are horrible fidelity and horrible quality. So that's one of the other trends that's going to drive some of the things that are going to change. Some days, it's like the other day I put on my headset and I heard good music. It was better than my Apple streaming. It was like real high fidelity. I haven't heard that in years. How many bits do we get in our stream on our phone that we consider to watch a sporting event? What kind of quality is that? Well, there's another television technology out there, ATSC3, which enables much better quality broadcast signal to be delivered. And they've been talking about this for years. The enhanced TVs, you'll probably see some shown here at the show. But there's a chance for broadcasters to get back in this game in a better way than they have. And if they do, it's going to be because of quality. Quality is going to matter again.
Yeah. So how about, I think one question always comes to mind, it comes up almost every year, just how much subscription, are people willing to pay as a consumer? And maybe, Robert, in terms of, coming in with a new streaming service that, doesn't have the big brand before you come in, how do you break into that subscription noise with the consumer?
I mean, it's going to start with content. I mean, ultimately, I think Saul said it earlier, and we've all heard it before, but content is king. Sorry for being cliche, but you draw people in with great programming. And, I still remember the first time the first episode of watching House of Cards on Netflix, which I think truly changed everything. And I said, okay, it's not blurred lines. There are no lines anymore. You can watch last night's television on your cell phone and you can watch a show originating from a digital platform on your living room television, and there is no difference. And as the quality of content has become extreme, I mean, look at what Amazon's doing with their Lord of the Rings program, and I mean, what is the difference between HBO and Netflix at this point? You probably have a good answer for me, but it's going to be content driven, and I think when you're talking about just time of day and how much you can actually spend watching programming, there are limits. But if you can break out with something that's interesting and you can find and hook consumers, you have a real opportunity. And I mean, we're seeing that where I am, and we have programming that's starring people you've heard of before. Not a subtle plug, but Stonehouse on January 17th, Matthew McFadden, who's on Succession. I mean, he's a bona fide actor on one of the biggest television shows in the United States, and he's starring in a series on BritBox, and we hope people watch it. And I think you can find opportunities to find unique programming on all sorts of services right now, and that's how services are going to break out. But of course, you made the point earlier. I mean, that costs money, and you have to take risk. And
we're going to help you out. We leave the televisions on all night in our house, and so you get more advertising revenue.
We don't have advertising, but you can buy a gift subscription for your family. Still do it. We're still.
I already
still
have
available.
several.
And let's move a little bit in terms like finding that subscriber. I think you talk about the world, and certainly the Discoveries and the Foxes have the ability to do a lot of cross branding across properties, or social plays so much. Influencers. Have you guys found sort of that world playing a little bit, or what you found to find subscribers?
Well, look, there's an ecosystem of aggregators. I mean, look what Amazon's doing with channels is pretty remarkable. That didn't exist 10 years ago when we were launching Hulu Plus. Everything was direct to consumer. And now if you look at, HBO Max is back on Amazon channels because the value of what they bring from a scope of audience perspective is so meaningful. Apple, Roku, these are all platforms now, and their job is to further distribute content or further distribute these businesses. And the data that we've seen certainly internally is a lot of that's incremental. So it's not cannibalistic necessarily to an owned and operated audience, at least for our platform. And so we'll continue to lean into those. But I think those businesses, those large tech platforms have discovered they can take there's a really good business about taking a piece of monthly subscription revenue and exposing their broad audiences to these services. So that is a major breakthrough in this business as well.
All right. So before we're going to open the questions in 1 minute, I always like to close it out with one last question, and we'll open it up. So among the panelists, is there any interesting company, product, app, stuff that you just said, wow, that's pretty cool. Obviously, it doesn't have to be business related, but we'll start with you.
Yeah, I saw one recently sort of in line with what we've been talking about. It's called Folks Media, where they're trying to give the power back to the consumer. I know Saul's very vocal on that, but you as a consumer spend a lot of time consuming different pieces of content, and you should earn value based on your consumption time, whether you're subscribing for things or sitting through ads. And the way I understand the app is it's meant to bundle different subscriptions and services you have to make cross search easier to find. Whereas Yellowstone, is it on Paramount or is it on Peacock? Depends on the season. Right. But with that, if you are a power user and you're going to sit through more advertising and that network is going to make more money on you, you can be rewarded back based on being a super binger versus a light watcher, something like that. So I think it's interesting with the idea as we all talk about the audience as a consumer, because we need them for our business, but they are the most valuable piece of what we do.
I'm not going to touch Chat GPT, but that is interesting.
Bring it up and see what it says.
I think you need to handle that one. Mine's not a particular. It's more of a business dynamic. I think what's interesting is where live sports goes with YouTube TV, Sunday Ticket. For years, live sports was always free over the air, in market. In the home market, which will still be probably respected with the Sunday Ticket at YouTube TV. But it's going to be interesting to see how live sports plays out in this new era of streaming.
It's a great point. Great point.
Yeah, that's a much bigger point than what I was going to make.
Oh wow, I wasn't expecting that, Robert.
No, it's great. It's hard, tough to follow that one. That's a good one. So I'm constantly trying to figure out ways to communicate with my teenage kids. So I'm going to plug a friend's app that was released a few weeks ago called Memix. It's a really interesting keyboard add-on that you could just download the app and you could very simply make memes that you can, like, I sent one to my daughter this morning that says, her name's Abigail, just said, "Daddy loves Abigail." And it was Bart Simpson writing it on it looked like Bart Simpson was writing it on a chalkboard. And I sent it to her and she was like, how in the world did you do that? So I was able to surprise my 12-year-old, which is pretty exciting. So check that one out.
That might be up there.
So you are making me look bad.
Yeah.
No, I'm much more
That's
interested.
that
I mean,
one.
personally, I'm much more interested in sports, but talking to my kids is important too.
So,
Well, we got to sort out the meta world and if that's real or not real. And then the NFT tokens we haven't talked about today. And, I don't know if that's what you're making for your daughter here, but eventually there's going to be some value in this digital art that's protected and secure and identified and individualized and controlled. And, I think it's been overhyped like most things digital, but I think there's a place in there to develop customer communities, customer relationships, customer experiences, and a new form of art.
yeah, cool.
So I'm going to be honest here. This is the question I had the most trouble with, which is a personal question. So that's weird. And I texted my stepson to see if he had seen any cool apps, and he didn't answer me. So, which is par for the course. So
Use Robert's new one.
I'm going to, yes.
Memix.
I'm going to use that later. I was like, maybe they'll think I'm cool. So I don't have an answer for this one.
And the one I'll throw out is along where Saul was going. Dale.e, DALL-E. It's really interesting. It's part of the whole AI thing, but you put in, hey, Beatles doing a concert on the moon, and you'll get like several pictures automatically generated of the Beatles playing a concert on the moon. And it's actually pretty good imagery. So it just shows you, I think, the power of how that whole world will come into programming and the world we're going into. So with that, I'm going to open up questions here. Yes.
Yeah, I had a quick question real fast. This is kind of taking it one step further from the spirit of CES. We're walking around seeing all this amazing new technology. And what it brings to mind is that content creators are now starting to be able to build content that may not be delivered on a two-dimensional screen, right? But it's still content itself. If consumers, especially the younger consumers, who we know are more attracted to ads and buying and purchasing through those avenues, if they're attracted to this type of content that's not delivered through traditional standard two-dimensional screens, like how are you guys in your companies thinking ahead and strategizing to bring this same model to those types of content?
And you're talking about like the Xboxes and the metaverses of the world. When you say more than two-dimensional,
it's more
Yeah,
than just two-dimensional. It's more than VR headsets and AR headsets. It's rooms, experiential technology. Expansive content that people are going to. I'm just curious how you guys are thinking about ad revenue strategized to those different types of content. And my name is Jordan Harvey. I work with Remote Control, just so you guys know. It's nice to meet you. Great panel.
anyone want to take that?
I mean, I think we're trying to do everything we can to update 4K with sports and, new studios and graphics on the desks. As far as content creators shooting stuff in 3D and VR, we probably tried some stuff early days there with NASCAR and with Major League Baseball, where you could sort of have the look of the umpire behind the plate and things like that. And audiences could choose maybe a camera angle. I do think we come back to it. It might have been a little early days when we thought about testing that, but I think it's a great point to the way we can sort of create new vantage points or ways for audiences to consume content that feels more personalized or, 3D and immersive, stuff like that. It's a great question.
And Amy, what are you seeing ad dollars go into the meta world or any of that stuff?
We are seeing ad dollars go into the metaverse. But I was thinking about that question from my perspective, because it's very different than what you guys would say. And I think the way that I'm looking at it is it's really hard on our side of the house, right? Because you have, and I'm dating myself, go back 50 years and you could run a 30-second spot and half the country will see it, right? And you can't do that now, which is fine, but you have to buy 20 different things to get anywhere close to what you were doing with one spot before, which costs a lot of money. Yeah. So I think even if we could find all the people and how to get them and find them, how do you pay for all that? So that's what we've been struggling with on our side, because it's a question that doesn't have an answer right now. Yes, there are ways around it, and we're figuring it out, but it's really hard for marketers.
Experimental budget. Other questions? Yes.
Arias under Solomon, New York. I wanted to ask you guys, obviously we're talking about monetizing the streaming platform, the streaming industry. Came at the content perspective. I wanted to double down on what Steve had mentioned earlier, identity spine, right? You talked a little bit about that product. How are you guys viewing the data monetization in a privacy compliant world? We're obviously moving from the crypto space. We have revenue streams in front of us that a lot of programs are trying to take advantage of. There are a lot of things like headwinds, economic headwinds we talked about, to try to offset those headwinds. How are you guys looking at the data monetization space, and how are your organizations oriented towards some of those challenges?
I'll say very judiciously, right? There has been a set of footprints for us to follow here. Nothing is going to come without a lot of rigor. A lot of our endpoints and data, the way we're thinking about deploying activation from an ad sales perspective, we're talking about clean room technology. We're talking about solutions that keep data protected on both sides of the house. So there's a ton of applications there. And I'll say there's a lot of cross-functional support internally from a legal perspective to ensure that we get it right. And also from some of the other work we're doing, there is an ecosystem out there that is already fairly privacy compliant. We're working with some endpoints and enablement partners where our content is distributed that are giving us access to the end consumer by means that are already protected. So in many ways, we don't have to worry about some of that stuff that maybe legacy digital platforms had to worry about. But I don't know if you had anything there.
Anyone else? All right, one more question. I think there'll be time. Yes.
To add that, maybe maybe you from Paris, and I was interested in your view about profiling. How do you will use the data in order to better profile the user and the consumer, and will you merge the different platforms in order to have a better understanding of who is the consumer and better serve you with the advertising?
That is the future.
That's a huge, yeah.
That's what we're all trying to do. And, the user has to increasingly opt into it, allow you to do it, and you have to give them something of benefit in return, or they don't want you to do it, or you're going to spook them. But, that's the holy grail to me, is be able to put all those points of information about the user together to identify the user, to identify them in their different roles, when they're at home, when they're at work, when they're with their family. The same person is not the same persona all the time. So there's a lot to be done there, a lot of opportunity. The tools are there now. It's a question of making them work.
I also think transparency is very critical. Mm-hmm. You have to be totally transparent with the consumers that are opting in or signing up for your products and services. I think that's the tack we're taking.
Yeah.
I think certainly an effort to build out our own profile, and then with those distribution partners requiring that they share that back with us as well as part of those negotiations. So if they are watching Fox on a Roku or a Hulu, that they share some of that subscription information from their profiles back to us for targeting and things like that.
And there's always that balance of targeting versus discovery. I feel like, in the news feeds I go on, I'm like, I just get the same news every day. And I'm like, because they're targeting the same topics I hit on. It's kind of a self-generational, loop. So I think that will also be the challenge as you get into streaming.
But we get a lot better information from places like TikTok, where we're getting signals all the time, every couple seconds, of what the consumer likes or doesn't like. We don't have to wait for a commercial on television to see how they react to it. So there's a lot more data to play with.
Well, great. Well, that concludes the panel. Please give a big round of applause for the panelists. Thank you.